Welcome to my next video in the Steps Method Concepts series. Today we're going to do something really simple, and that's an analysis of one position. And this is to reinforce a previous video that I did on finding the best move and finding a plan. And these are the 3 steps in the search and solving strategy in the steps method. So we have the orientation. You look at the position, what has changed, what does my opponent want to do, find direct threats and tactical characteristics, look at positional aspects, activity and vulnerability, then we calculate and evaluate, establish the goal, find moves that fit with the goal using the mini concepts like attacking the king or trapping a piece or increasing activity. And then we verify calculation. We visualize how the position will change after you play your move. And you really think about, did I really consider the strongest reply of my opponent? So for the tactical orientation, you look at the left side of this sheet. So unprotected pieces or vulnerable pieces, vulnerable king, pieces with limited mobility. So you don't go immediately to moves and tactical themes, but you look at the left side and you try to get a complete orientation done before you start thinking about candidate moves and tactical themes in the position. So we're going to practice this on one position and first do the orientation, and afterwards I will ask you if you can make an analysis tree. And just a reminder of how an analysis tree looks. It's like, so you can see here, it starts with the move by black, then you have a move by white, different options. Every node corresponds with a new move, a new branch where there are multiple options. And at the end of a line, you give an evaluation, like in this case, wins the exchange, black is winning, etc. And I will come back to this one, and you can compare notes after our analysis. So the position we're going to discuss today is this position. So white is the move, and you see the last move played by black, which is knight g4. So let's start with asking ourselves what has changed in the position and what is the intent of our opponent. Okay, so knight g4 threatens the move knight e3 with a double attack on the queen on d1 and the rook on f1. So now take a moment to make a complete list of things that you find relevant in this position in terms of orientation. You can write them down on a sheet of paper, pause the video and then come back. So let me highlight to you what the most important things are. We already mentioned one, of course, which is that this knight is threatening to come to e3, attacking the rook and the queen. The other thing what we notice is when we look at undefended pieces, that the knight is undefended on the black side, the rook is undefended on h8. It's always important to think about what are the most relevant characteristics. So the fact that the knight is undefended on g4 is more relevant than the rook on a8, because it's not so easy for white to get to that rook. We can play queen d5, but after bishop e7 there's not much going on. So actually, if you look to this position, you could say that we have a battery of the queen and the knight, and we are threatening a discovered attack on the undefended piece knight g4. So let's consider other elements. Of course, we see a very strong square for white on d5, and I mean it of course would be very nice to occupy that with a knight. In addition, we see that white's king is a little bit exposed because the pawn is on f5 and the diagonal of b6 to g1 has been weakened. So to summarize, what are the most important characteristics? There is the direct threat by black of knight e3. There are undefended pieces with a knight on g4 and a rook on a8. White has a battery and is threatening a discovered attack with the knight on f3 and the queen on d1. And the position of the white king has been slightly compromised because of the weakness of the diagonal g1 to b6. And when you look at this position and you think about black playing queen c5, if there would be no rook or bishop, we could have a smothered mate with the knight. So the question is, what are we going to do? What are the candidate moves? So you can stop the video here and then make your analysis tree, or you can follow along. And of course, if you would not have done any orientation, you might have said, well, I'm just going to kick the knight, right? If you would not have spent any time on your orientation, you say, oh, knight g4, I'm just going to kick it away. But of course, knight e3, and we lose the exchange, and black is better, although we have some compensation because knight d5 is very strong. The second, of course, alternative would be to say we can defend the square e3 by playing a move like queen e2. After queen e2, black, of course, is going to develop their pieces, connect the rooks. And now we say, well, not too much going on. d5 is now guarded by the knight and the bishop, and it looks like a pretty balanced position. So of course, the candidate moves that stands out is knight d5. It's like an active defense. It attacks the queen on c7, attacks the bishop on e7, and a defense against knight e3. So this would be a moment again to think like, how do we expect black to defend? And of course it will be very tempting to first look at the forcing moves, and the forcing move here would be, of course, queen c5. Check. And taking advantage of this weakened diagonal. And now, of course, white can play two things. Bishop f2 or king h1, those are the most natural moves to play here. And the advantage of bishop f2 would be to say, by playing queen c5, the queen is no longer defending the bishop on e7. So perhaps I can take advantage of that. And king h1 kind of maintains the tension in the position, and it is another opportunity. So we would branch out, if you make your analysis tree now, in bishop f2 and king h1, and try to find the best continuations after those moves. After bishop f2, black is forced to take. And now the question is, we have this intermediate move, knight takes e7, king goes to f8. Can we go back with the knight to d5? No, because black has a discovered attack with knight takes d1, winning the queen, so that is not possible. So the rook has to take. And now we have to evaluate how happy we are with this position. So we have orientation, calculation, and evaluation. And now we get to the evaluation part. And are we far enough in the tree to say we can evaluate this position, or do we have to assess it any further? I think I would be tempted here to play f6 and queen d2. And I would think this would be interesting for white, but it's not clear whether it's winning. I would have the threat of queen takes h6. I would like to play knight h4 followed by knight f5 check. But perhaps black can defend by a move like rook g8, rook g6, bishop e6, rook, the other rook to g8, and create some counterplay. So I would like the position for white, but I would not be convinced that I have a winning advantage. So let's go back to queen c5. So after bishop f2, knight takes f2. The real question is here, we saw that we could really take advantage of knight takes e7. The question is this knight on d5 actually a stronger piece, a more active piece than the bishop on e7? And when we ask the question like that, the answer is pretty obvious. Yes, it's a very strong knight on this outpost. So why just trade it for this defensive bishop on e7? So we could instead just take back, play bishop f2, and we look at, of course, c8 and a8 are still underdeveloped. And now we can say the queen came out. We can attack the queen. And we can see that, for instance, after queen b5, we have knight c7 with a double attack. So we can chase the queen. And after queen c4, we can play knight d2, queen c6, c4. And this looks much better than the previous variation with the king on e7. So this looks actually quite promising. There was, of course, a third line where we said, okay, we are going to keep the tension and we are just going to play king h1. What do we expect black to do about the undefended bishop e7? Well, I would expect the bishop to go to f8. Again, we can chase the queen, and after a move like queen c6, now finally we can take advantage of the characteristic that we have a discovered attack on the knight on g4, where I'm playing a move like knight d2. The bishop cannot go, the knight on g4 cannot go to f2, not to e3. So can only return, and now we have damaged the pawn structure of black, and white is much better. We can start our attack. So that looks even more promising than the line with bishop f2. Did we consider all the strongest moves by black? So this is part of the verification. Did we consider all the strongest moves? Well, if we go back after knight d5, queen c5 is very tempting because it is a check, it's a forcing move. And actually we saw that the disadvantage of the fact that the bishop on e7 is undefended was actually not so important. But we also saw that the queen got chased by b4 and the queen was actually kind of vulnerable there. And black might decide to just play queen b7. Now again, we come back to our orientation and characteristic and we say, okay, the knight on g4 is still undefended. What kind of discovered attacks do I have? So let's look at knight d4 again. And this, of course, is very good for white. The pawn on d4 will fall shortly, and after, for instance, bishop f2, bishop takes d4, and white has a winning position. And if black doesn't take the knight here, but this goes back, then suddenly we have this double attack with the knight on c6, attacking the queen on c7, e7, and the rook on d8. Of course, black can delay it for one move. But also in this case we have knight c6 with a double attack on the queen and the rook. So to come back on the introduction, this is the analysis tree. If you had spent some time yourself, you can compare. I want to say these are the lines that I came up with. So it's not the best computer analysis. There are very surprising lines that the engine will find. But I think for structuring your own thinking process, it would be very good to create those analysis trees and then compare them and see where you end up. That was my video for today. I hope you enjoyed it and it was useful, and I hope to see you soon. Thank you.